Hello, everybody, and welcome to That Wrestling Show, the podcast where all pro wrestling matters. I'm your host, Bill Yankovi, and this is such a newsworthy week in the world of professional wrestling that, well, that's what's going to be talked about here. A lot of news to discuss, plus going to preview this Sunday's AEW Revolution pay-per-view, which, I'm going to be honest with you guys, it is shaping up to be a very, very interesting show. Now, before I go any further into this week's episode, I do have an announcement that I want to make at this time, and this is something that I have thought about doing for a while, considering what this is, and I thought, well, you know, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it when the time comes. So, we are in the month of March, and of course we're on the road to WrestleMania, and we're on, a road to a lot of very interesting events coming up and situations. But this year is the 20th anniversary of the end of the Monday Night Wars. Believe it or not, it has been 20 years since Vince McMahon bought his competition, as he said. So, I would like to announce that in 3 weeks, on March 26th, we will have a special episode of That Wrestling Show where we will be covering the end of the Monday Night Wars between WWF and WCW, and really what has changed in the 20 years since the end of the Monday Night Wars. Has it been good? Has it been bad? And will we ever see a time like that again in professional wrestling? I'm hoping to have some guests be with me for that episode, and because it's going to be a fun look back at a historic moment in professional wrestling, the end of the Monday Night Wars. That will be in 3 weeks, and that episode will come out on the day of the 20th anniversary of the end of World Championship Wrestling, March 26th, 2021. Once I get a couple of guests, I will let you guys know who will be on the show. Have a fun discussion, group discussion. So, it should be pretty fun to have. Okay, gonna start off this week with some unfortunate news. This was something that, if you'd been paying attention over the weekend, you kind of knew was gonna happen. But, maybe you were kind of pulling hope, but Jim Crockett Jr. passed away on Wednesday at the age of 76 years old due to complications of liver and kidney failure. Reports had come out recently that he had been dealing with COVID-19 before this, and Meltzer reported earlier in the week that Crockett was in grave condition, and Jim Crockett Jr. passed away on Wednesday at the age of 76. The story of Jim Crockett Jr. is a very interesting story because his father was Jim Crockett Sr., who was the head of Jim Crockett Promotions, which began in the 1930s. And Jim Crockett Sr. did more than wrestling. He had bunch of entertainment activities outside of professional wrestling, but wrestling was the main one that Jim Sr. was known for. Jim Crockett Sr. passed away in 1973, leaving a very interesting situation. Who would run the day-to-day operations of the promotion? Because Jim Sr. had 4 kids. Besides Jim Jr., he had David Crockett, he had Jackie Crockett, and his daughter, Frances Crockett. Well, it ended up going to Jim Jr.'s brother-in-law, John Ringley. Yes, you heard that right. It went to his brother-in-law. However, John Ringley stepped down after being in, well, let's just say some uncomfortable situations. And Jim Jr. took over the reins as the promoter of Jim Crockett Promotions that same year. So, after that, Jim Crockett Jr. hired George Scott to be the booker, and you know, this is the 70s we're talking about, and you gotta remember the Mid-Atlantic territory at this time is a tag team territory. It's mostly known for outstanding tag teams. Eventually, towards the end of the 70s, going into the 80s, they become more than a tag team promotion. They do end up being a singles promotion. They have the United States title, they would have the TV title, and then eventually, in 1981, they would have the NWA World Heavyweight title. So Jim Crockett had 3 terms as the president of the NWA. And I want to talk about each one because each one is significant in their own way. Now, I do want to say, for the record, that the person that Crockett became president after was Bob Geigel. Each time. So, they're linked together in history. So, Jim Crockett's first run as president of the NWA was in 1980. He had a 2-year term, ended in 1982. During that time, he had a working relationship with Maple Leaf Wrestling, the Toronto territory, which was owned by Frank Tunney. That working relationship continued until Frank's death in 1983, where then his nephew, Jack Tunney, who would later become the president of the World Wrestling Federation, would would have a working agreement with Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. Also during this time, Crockett formed a very short-lived relationship with Vern Gagne and the AWA to create Pro Wrestling USA as a way to fight Vince McMahon and the WWF as the WWF was becoming national. So Crockett's second term began in 1985, and this is where Jim Crockett Promotions really becomes fascinating to watch because they are now the number one territory for the NWA because some of these promotions get bought out by Vince McMahon and some either barely hang on or they eventually, decide, well, we're going to go with Crockett Promotions. So one of the things that happens is that Jim Crockett gets the 6:05 time slot on WTBS because Vince McMahon paid him, $1 million, or no, Jim paid Vince $1 million for the 6:05 time slot, which Vince more than happily gave him. And that's where World Championship Wrestling, even though that was already a Georgia territory show, became even bigger around the country. So in 86, they come up with the first ever Jim Crockett Sr. Memorial Cup, which was an all-day tag team tournament, which had tag teams from literally all over the world. I mean, if you look at the roster of teams that are in that tournament, it is amazing. And it is held in the Superdome in New Orleans. The Crockett Cup would end up becoming one of the premier events of Jim Crockett Promotions during this time. They would do 3 versions of the Crockett Cup in 86, 87, and 88. And then they did a 4th version of the Crockett Cup in 2019, which was a collaboration with the NWA under Billy Corgan and Ring of Honor. They were scheduled to have done a 5th one last year, but because of COVID-19, we never got the 5th installment of the Crockett Cup. So the 3rd and final reign or term as president was in 1987. That year, or during that term, they buy out Championship Wrestling from Florida and the Universal Wrestling Federation Mid-South Territory, and they get some very good talent there. And 87 is a big year because this is when the War Games first comes, and this is a big deal. 87 is financially the biggest year that Jim Crockett Promotions ever has. However, you know, this was the 80s, and when you make that kind of money, if you're not smart, you're going to end up spending that money, and that's exactly what happened. And towards the end of 1988, Jim Crockett Jr. and Crockett Promotions, they ran out of money. And there were one of two options. Either sell the promotion to Ted Turner, or let it go bankrupt. Let it die. So they make the deal with Turner, with the one condition being that Ric Flair has to be on the show, and if he's not, forget about it. We do know about that story. So they make the deal. Crockett, believe it or not, and this is, not a lot of people know about this, but Jim Crockett remained the president of the NWA until 1991. And then after that, he's out of the picture with, you know, World Championship Wrestling at the time. Crockett tries to run a promotion in Texas, in Dallas, Texas, in the mid-90s. It really didn't work, and he retired after that, and he spent the remainder of his day as a Texas realtor and mortgage loan originator. Very, very interesting. Jim Crockett Jr., you know, was the one that had, which would eventually be Starrcade 83, the first one, Flair and Race. He brought in Dusty Rhodes to come work for the promotion, and you know, there was so much of the territory, so much of the Mid-Atlantic that Jim Crockett Promotions was really a part of. And you know, it's kind of, in a way, with this death, it's almost like we've lost one of the last pieces of the territory system, of the old territory days. And, you know, Mid-Atlantic, like I said, when Jim Crockett Jr. got the promotion, well, he didn't, you know, he begrudgingly took it over because his brother-in-law was being a doofus, I'll say that. It was a tag team promotion. And by the time that Crockett is done in 88, it became this big national, you know, wrestling promotion. It was the number 2 promotion behind the WWF. They had Ted Turner's backing with the TV. You know, so many things that happened during Crockett's time. Starrcade being obviously the biggest one. You had the Clash of Champions. You had the Crockett Cup. You had the War Games. You had all of that. And all of this happened while under Jim Crockett's reign as the head of Jim Crockett Promotions. And is Jim Crockett a Hall of Famer? That is a question that I know it doesn't get brought up, but I think it should be. And the answer to that is yes. I really believe Jim Crockett Jr. should be in any wrestling Hall of Fame, because look at what he did. You know, the Mid-Atlantic territory, it had good business, but it didn't have great business. But man, once they got into the late 70s and the early 80s, you know, they were just going sky high, and they, like I said, they became the number one promotion in the NWA in the 80s. And, basically, if you were not under contract with Vince and the WWF, Crockett was the way to go. But, this is a piece of a lot of, Jim Crockett Promotions was a piece of childhood that a lot of wrestling fans remember. And, it is a sad day. But the only thing I can say to that is Jim Crockett did an unbelievable job running Jim Crockett Promotions, was a phenomenal promoter, and really stuck with pro wrestling when he didn't have to. He stuck with it, and that's what I think we should remember him for, if anything else. Once again, Jim Crockett passed away March the 3rd at the age of 76 years old. On to other news. New Japan announced this week that they are merging, or unifying, the IWGP Heavyweight title and the IWGP Intercontinental title into one championship, the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship. And Kota Ibushi is its first champion. Obviously, this is not a very popular decision on the idea of the fans. The fans don't like this idea at all. I have not seen one positive response to this decision. And I could see why, because the Intercontinental title was the number 2 title behind the IWGP Heavyweight title. And it didn't have a long life. If you think about, championship belts, the belt was around for only 10 years, if that, 10 years. And, when the belt first debuted, you got to think back to 10 years ago. You really have to think back to 10 years ago. We're in 2011, and the belt, or not the belt, but the promotion at this time is not at the heights that it is today. It was in a bad position, and, it was like, this might be the end of, New Japan, but this is the early 2010s, and, you have amazing wrestlers that end up holding this belt. The first person to hold this belt, and, you never know, this may be a question on Jeopardy someday, was MVP. Yes, MVP was the first Intercontinental Champion, winning it in a tournament here in the United States. And I'll talk about MVP a little bit later on. But he would hold that belt for 148 days before losing it to Masato Tanaka of ECW fame. And then, it's almost like there's no bad person that ever held this belt. Hiroki Goto, Shinsuke Nakamura, La Sombra, who would later become Andrade, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Bad Luck Fale, Kenny Omega, Michael Elgin, Tetsuya Naito, Minoru Suzuki, Chris Jericho, Kota Ibushi, Jay White, and Evil are the men that ended up holding the IWGP Intercontinental title, with Naito having the most reigns at 6, but Shinsuke having not only the most combined title defenses, but the most combined days as champion. He had 17 combined defenses of the IWGP Heavyweight title, and was champion for 901 days total. That is an amazing accomplishment. And I think what the legacy of the IWGP Intercontinental title is this was a belt that, if you think about it, became like the secondary belt, with the IWGP Heavyweight title being the main belt. But at the same time, it at times was the main belt in itself, because there were times where it main evented shows. I mean, it main evented a Wrestle Kingdom one year, based on fan voting. That's and maybe part of that is because of the belt, and the other reason is probably because of the people that were involved in it, being Shinsuke Nakamura and Hiroshi Tanahashi. And I think that is the lineage of the IWGP Intercontinental title. That's the legacy of the IWGP Intercontinental title, is that at first it was a secondary belt, but by the end it became just as big as the IWGP Heavyweight title. And the IWGP Heavyweight title, my God, I mean, that in itself is a legacy onto its own. I mean, the belt was born in 1987 and was in existence for 34 years. At the time, it was the oldest championship in Japan. I think the All Japan Triple Crown title is now the oldest title as far as heavyweight titles go in Japan. I might be wrong on that. But here, you think about the people that held this belt. Antonio Inoki's the first one. Then you have Fujinami, Vader, Choshu, Muta, Hashimoto, Sasaki, Chono, Norton, Tenryu. And then you keep going on. You have Tenzan, Kojima holds the belt, Tanahashi, Nakamura, and then you go into Okada and Naito, Ibushi, Styles, Omega, Jay White. So many great wrestlers have held the IWGP Heavyweight title, and there are some reigns that are some of the most legendary reigns of all time. I mean, Tanahashi had it, Okada had these legendary reigns. Let's not forget Muta, let's not forget Fujinami, let's not forget Vader. We could go on and on and on about the individuals who held the title, and how great and important they made the IWGP Heavyweight title. And also what made it important was the fact that, this title was defended in the United States at times when they were with WCW, and I want to say maybe a couple of times with TNA, actually it was in Ring of Honor a couple of times as well. So that belt is a world title, or was a world title belt when it existed, and I think that is the legacy of the IWGP Heavyweight title, is that belt was a world traveled belt and had unbelievable champions, amazing champions. The record for the single longest reign, and I mean days wise, and I want to get this right, I believe is Hiroshi Tanahashi, who had one reign. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's Shinya Hashimoto, who had a 489-day reign as the IWGP Heavyweight Champion. Tanahashi had the record of the most title defenses at one point. Then Okada ended up having it with 12. And, one of the important things about this belt is, it was defended all over the world. I mean, a couple years ago in Madison Square Garden in New York City, who would have ever thought in the 80s and in the 90s, especially the 90s, that this belt is going to be defended in 20 years in Madison Square Garden in New York City, where no other wrestling promotion, goes there except the WWF. And that's what is amazing. That is the legacy of the IWGP Heavyweight title. Now, as far as this new belt, the IWGP World Heavyweight title. I understand why they did this, because it is a global promotion at this point right now. Do I think it was the wisest move? Not really. I don't think this was the wisest move, because you basically have eliminated a championship where you could say, we could have a main event on a show and have it be the Intercontinental title. When maybe you want to do something with the IWGP Heavyweight Champion on that show and you want to switch it up, you now lose one belt. So that's my negative on that. So it is now, there are only three, actually, let me correct this. 2 heavyweight title belts, the other being the United States heavyweight title, because the Never title is an open weight title, so basically anybody can challenge for that belt. You have the junior heavyweight title, you have the junior heavyweight tag title, and the regular tag title, and you have the Never openweight 6-man tag titles. So now you're down to 7 belts. It's one of those things where it's kind of a negative thing. And I think back when I heard this news and I started reading people's responses, I kept thinking back to when the WWE decided to retire the Intercontinental title in 2002 and how much of a negative response that was. And it's like, oh my God, what the hell are you doing? Why are you retiring the Intercontinental title? They eventually brought it back like 6-7 months later. But here, I don't see them bringing back the IWGP Intercontinental title, unfortunately. So, but, this is a big news. The unification of both the IWGP Heavyweight title and the Intercontinental title into one, well, I guess we could say one super belt, the IWGP World Heavyweight title. And to wrap up talking about New Japan, they announced on their anniversary show that they're going to do 2 shows in the month of May. One will be an outdoor show, May the 15th, at Yokohama Stadium, a baseball park, and the other one, May the 29th, which is a Saturday here, well, it's a Saturday everywhere, at the Tokyo Dome. So this is going to be the first time since 2005 that they are doing more than one show at the Tokyo Dome in a calendar year, and these shows are both called Wrestle Grand Slam. And you can bet right here on that wrestling show, once information comes out on the matches that'll take place, they will be covered right here. Speaking of shows, gotta talk about the most bizarre story of the week, but in a way might be a saving story. So, there was supposed to have been a show on March 20th in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was called Wrestling for Women's Charity. You know, such an original name of a show. Well, it was going to have, some big names. Brian Cage, Sonny Kiss, Trey Miguel, Two Cold Scorpio, Davey Boy Smith Jr., JTG, among others. And this was, a charity show. It was supposed to be for a women's charity. Well, there was a problem. The problem is Joey Ryan is on the poster, number one. And number two, he's the one who came up with the show. So, after this was found out, Tony Khan went on Twitter and pulled any AEW talent that was scheduled to be on that show off the show. And then he decided, I will donate, to this charity. Then the show gets canceled. Then this charity becomes questioned. Like, is this a real charity? And if you go on Twitter, it is such an interesting thing because one of the people that was setting this up is the head of of this ministry called Joyce Meyer Ministries, where, and I'll read this because it was posted on his Twitter. Every girl deserves to understand her worth in Christ. Healing the Soul of a Woman 30-Day Study. This is on there. No matter who you are, every woman has experienced pain and disappointments in life. Learn how to access the healing that only God can provide. And I learned from Josiah the other day that, if you don't have money, then you will not get to heaven, apparently. So, but yeah, this has become such an interesting story, and it really proves how much of a scumbag Joey Ryan is, because, he basically, his wrestling career was done when the Speak Out movement happened last year, and he's been suing every single person that has, claimed that, oh, he did this, he did that, and he comes off looking very bad. And then he ends up suing Pele Primo, for those that don't remember, used to wrestle in Ring of Honor, and some of his friends put on Tony's Twitter account, donate your money to Pele's GoFundMe campaign, which at the time of the recording has made almost $16,000 with a goal of $35,000. All I'm going to say is this. How much of a steaming pile of dog crap do you have to be to do an event, to create an event with the idea that you'll get money for a women's charity, and then you yourself have been accused by many women of doing unspeakable things? And, the world just amazes me sometimes. The world just amazes me. And sometimes it amazes me in the dumbest ways possible. Just the dumbest ways possible. But I'm glad that they figured this out, that they, canceled this before it even happened. So, at least they were able to stop anything bad from happening. Rumors are almost facts, as it has been reported that NXT will be moving to Tuesday nights, and they will go on Tuesday nights starting Tuesday, April the 13th, 2 days after WrestleMania 37 is in the books. But before they go, it was announced this week that they will have a takeover on the Thursday before WrestleMania. So the week of WrestleMania is going to be a stacked week of wrestling. Wednesday is going to be the last NXT, and you got Dynamite there. Thursday is the takeover. Friday is SmackDown. Saturday's night one of WrestleMania. Sunday is night 2 of WrestleMania. Monday is Raw. Tuesday is NXT. And the following Wednesday is Dynamite. So, you've got a lot going on there. I think this is a good move for AEW, or for NXT, pardon me. Because they have not won in a long, long time in the ratings against NXT. And I think them doing that was a dumb decision. I think we all, wrestling fans around the world would agree, even before this happened or looking back on it, that, yeah, this was a pretty dumb decision on WWE's part. And, it shows. It really shows. Like, there are weeks where Dynamite wipes the floor with NXT. It's scary. Hopefully, the move to Tuesday night will be good for NXT. They can have a bigger audience. I don't know if it's going to be on USA Network or if it's going to be on Peacock. I would be very interested to see if it goes to Peacock or if it stays on USA. But it should be a very interesting decision. Speaking of moves and changes, the NWA announced this week that, hey, we're not done. Not by a long shot. People thought, after losing so much talent that the NWA was going to close down, that it was going to be over, it was finished. But here's Billy Corgan and the NWA. 2 announcements made this week. In just 2 weeks, March the 21st, they are going to have a pay-per-view on Fight.tv. And it is a Sunday afternoon show, which is very important to note. It is a Sunday afternoon event called Back for the Attack. It is a 4 o'clock start. So you're going to get 2 shows that day on the 21st. You're going to get that, and you're going to get Fastlane. So I'm probably just going to say it right off the bat. Probably NWA is going to be the better show of the 2 that day. Just got that feeling. And then 2 days later is when the new episodes of NWA Power come back into the mix. And they will be on Fight TV. And what's very interesting about this is that, unlike when they were on YouTube, where it was free, you have to pay a very small subscription to get these new episodes of NWA Power. How much it is, I do not know. I have not read anything about prices yet, but as soon as I know, you will get it here firsthand on that wrestling show. I do want to mention my thoughts on Shaquille O'Neal on Dynamite Wednesday. You know what? That was a fun little tag match. And I think the way they handled that, the way they did that, was so good. Because they could have made that whole match about Shaq and Cody. Instead, they make it about the women, Jade and Red Velvet. And they both look wonderful in that match. They look absolutely wonderful in that match. And you know what? I'm going to give credit where credit is due to Shaq. Because even I was a little scared, like, oh boy, this might not end good. He ends up taking a freaking bump through 2 tables. Oh my gosh. I don't know how many athletes, current or former, would risk their future by doing a bump like that. I really don't know. But that was a fun match, It ended up being better than it should have been. Actually, it was better than it had every right to be honest. But that was a fun match. It was fun. If you were really expecting it to be the match of the year, a 5-star classic, then your expectations were way too high, my friends. But this was just a fun match to watch from beginning to end. And they were at the beginning of the show, which I was kind of a little curious about, but you know what? It kind of made up for it with how good it was. And I think the main thing they did was, if there were any weaknesses of Shaq in the ring, they hid that very well because it was a tag team match. So, good job all around, by Cody, Red Velvet, Shaq, Jade Cargill, anybody, involved in the match in AEW. Just a very good job all around with that. But the big story this week is beyond a shadow of a doubt, the crowning of a new WWE champion. Bobby Lashley wins the WWE Championship from The Miz. And it was one of those things where it's like, you kind of knew it was gonna happen, but it was like, you want to see how it gets to it, like where, the direction is, where did they take it. And, it was not the best direction in the world. Let's call it as it is. Because we all knew as fans that, hey, we're going to get this match on Raw. So, how it happens is, there's an opening segment with Drew McIntyre and Miz and all that. And MVP comes out and he's like, we're having our match at 9 o'clock. We're having this match at 9 o'clock. So you get to 9 o'clock and Miz is like, oh, I got stomach cramps. I don't think I'm going to be able to make this title defense. And, Lashley's ticked off and he goes after Miz in the back. And then John Morrison, if you didn't catch this, folks, this was pretty hilarious. He yells out, quick, somebody get him a towel. Okay, we'll get him a towel. So now the match is pushed back to 10 o'clock. And the bell rings. Miz runs out of the ring, grabs the belt, gets counted out. Lashley wins by countout. And then I loved the MVP Shane Bobby Lashley segment. And MVP is so upset and he goes, this is bullshit. And it's so great because they don't edit that out. It is kept in there. It's live. I loved it. And Shane's like, look, you're going to get another match. And if he doesn't come back, we're going to strip him of the belt and we're going to give you the title. So then Miz comes back and it's the third time around and then it's a lumberjack match and Lashley just dominates the Miz. Miz never got an offensive move in. And, Miz is put in the hurt lock. He taps. And Bobby Lashley's the new WWE champion. I will say this before I get into this fact. Since June of last year, which feels like an eternity, but it's been about 9 months, I don't think there has been anybody on the WWE roster that has improved the most since that time, like Bobby Lashley has. He gets out of that horrible angle with Lana, which is none of their fault. It is not Lashley's fault. It is not Lana's fault. It is just a crappy angle. He gets put together with MVP, and the Hurt Business starts to form. Lashley's the U.S. champion, and he has this belt for about 6 months, and he never got pinned to lose the title. He was never beat for the U.S. title. And he's just been this dominant, nasty, muscular guy, and it's like this, in a way, it's almost like this is the Bobby Lashley we've waited for. And he is on the run of his life. He is on the run of his life, and he has earned the right by being the WWE champion, and it is just amazing. And I don't think anybody could be more happier than the fans, because he's been put through so many crappy angles over the years, especially since he came back to WWE, that it's like, what are they going to do? They may never, give this guy anything. And he just, once he's done with Lana, it's boom, gone. He's all the way to the top. And that's where he is right now, at the top. And it's very likely we're going to see him in one of the big matches at WrestleMania this year. Okay, so I want to run down this list, because Bobby Lashley joined a very interesting list. So I'm going to read these names to you. Kurt Angle, Mick Foley, AJ Styles, Rob Van Dam, Jeff Hardy, Drew McIntyre, Alberto Del Rio, and now Bobby Lashley. What do those 8 names all have in common? Well, let me tell you. They have held both the Impact World title and the WWE Heavyweight title. Those 8 men are the only 8 to have ever held both belts, the Impact World title and the WWE World title. That's a very small list. And let's talk about some of the men that have held the Impact title. This is basically the episode of titles here. Sting's held it. Samoa Joe has held the title. James Storm, Bobby Roode, Austin Aries, Bully Ray, Eric Young, EC3, Matt Hardy, Eddie Edwards, Pentagon Jr., Johnny Impact, Brian Cage, Sami Callihan, Tessa Blanchard, go on and on and on. And, these individuals have held the Impact title, but never held the WWE title, and a lot of them probably will never get that opportunity because they probably will never be in WWE. And vice versa. There are people in WWE that probably will never go to Impact and win the Impact World title. So, a lot of history was made this week with Bobby Lashley becoming the 8th individual to win both in a career, the Impact World title and the WWE Heavyweight title. And again, congratulations to Bobby Lashley. He has deserved this. He worked long and hard to get to this moment. And, maybe there were people who thought this was never going to happen, but it has happened. Well, this Sunday, history could very well be made at AEW Revolution. And I have the card in front of me, which is time to make predictions. And including the pre-show, there are 9 matches in total. So I'm going to start with the pre-show match. It's going to be women's tag team action as Riho and Thunder Rosa will face Britt Baker and Rebel in tag team action. Should be an interesting match. I'm gonna say Riho and Thunder Rosa win. That one's a tough one to pick, but I'm gonna go with Riho and Thunder Rosa. Then in the main card, we have a casino tag team battle royale with the winning team to receive a future shot at the AEW World Tag Team titles. Now, these are the teams, as of this moment, that have been announced for this battle royal. We have Bear Country, Bear Boulder and Bear Bronson, Alex Reynolds and John Silver of the Dark Order, Evil Uno and Stu Grayson of the Dark Order, Santana and Ortiz, The Butcher and the Blade, Private Party, Top Flight, Death Triangle, Varsity Blondes, the Seidel Brothers, SoCal Uncensored, The Natural Nightmares, Chaos Project, and the Gun Club are the teams that have been announced to this point. Wow. If I had to make a pick out of this group, this is a toughie. I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to go SCU because they have that angle where if they lose one more match as a tag team, then they're going to retire. So I'm going to say Kazarian and Daniels win this Battle Royal. We have more tag team action as Miro and Kip Sabian will face Orange Cassidy and Chuck Taylor. I'm going to say Miro and Sabian win this tag team match. Then we have a Face of the Revolution ladder match where the winner will receive a future TNT Championship match. And it's been announced that that championship match will happen this coming Wednesday on Dynamite. So the competitors in the match, Cody Rhodes, Scorpio Sky, Penta El Zero, Lance Archer, and Max Caster, with a sixth person to be announced at the show. I'm going to say Scorpio Sky wins it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the mystery entrant wins it as well. But I'm going to go Scorpio Sky on this one. Adam Page will face Matt Hardy in a very interesting match where the winner will receive the loser's 2021 first quarter earnings. Very interesting stipulation. I'm going to say that Matt Hardy's going to end up with some big money on that one. We have a street fight. Brian Cage and Ricky Starks of Team Taz will face Darby Allin and Sting. I think this is a pretty obvious one. Darby and Sting are going to win this one. And then we have our 3 championship matches. Hikaru Shida will defend the AEW Women's title against Ryo Mizunami, who won the Eliminator Tournament to earn this opportunity. Shida's had the belt since May. It's been almost a full year, and I really like Shida as champion, but I think we're going to have a new champion. I really do. I think Ryo Mizunami is going to win the AEW Women's World title here this Sunday at Revolution. The Young Bucks are going to defend the AEW Tag Team titles against Chris Jericho and MJF. Would be interesting to see Jericho and MJF win the belt, but I see the Young Bucks retaining. And in the main event, this is the biggie that they're talking about. Kenny Omega defending the AEW World title against Jon Moxley in an exploding barbed wire death match. To the best of my knowledge, this has never been done in the United States live on pay-per-view. If I am wrong, please somebody message me and let me know. It would be interesting if Moxley won the belt, but it's Kenny Omega. Kenny is going to retain the AEW World title. Plus, we were told on Dynamite this week by Paul White that he had a big scoop that a Hall of Fame worthy talent will be making their debut at Revolution this Sunday. I have no idea who it is, and honestly, I would like to be surprised. I would love to be surprised. I'm going to avoid all spoilers. Hopefully no one will spoil it for me or for you guys who like surprises. I kind of want to see what this surprise is, to be honest. But we'll have to wait and see. Well, that's going to do it for the show this week, but let's wrap it up. If you have any questions or comments, send an email, wrestlingman@thatwrestlingshow.com. Don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at WrestlingShow11. Follow the show on Instagram at That Wrestling Show. Join the Facebook group, That Wrestling Show fan group. You typed it in the search bar and you're right there. If you can't find it, it's okay. I post the link in the description of each and every episode. And if you like what you heard here, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/That Wrestling Show, where you could pledge as little as $1 or as much as $3, maybe more if you like us. And you can check out some extra content that we do for you, the fans. Okay, quickly going to plug some friends and podcasts that we like here. Check out our Vantage Point, the Retro Wrestling Podcast with Joe Murata and Michael Quinn, as this week they defend In Your House, It's Time. Plus, week 2 of the Royal Rankings of the best WrestleMania main events. And they head down south to review Memphis Wrestling. That is this week on our Vantage Point, the Retro Wrestling Podcast. Also check out Greetings from Allentown with Peter Winston. Also listen to Juice Pro Wrestling, where this week they interview Justin Santos from the Get Cho podcast. Check them out. That is this week on Juice Pro Wrestling. And real quick, check out the 24-inch Python, or the 24-inch podcast, pardon me, with Steve Bennett and Dave Rollins, where they take a look at the career of Hulk Hogan. I didn't get a chance to advertise or plug this on the last episode, so I'm going to do it here. They are going to discuss Hulk Hogan's feud with Dr. D, David Schultz. You can find that under the Sportscasters podcast. If you're looking for non-wrestling related podcasts, then check out the Three Stooges Throwback with Gabe Russo, where he watches and reviews each and every Three Stooges short. This week he reviews Back to the Woods. That is this week on the Three Stooges Throwback. Also check out Last Stop Penn Station with Carrie Silken and Ian Riccaboni. Also check out The Castle Vault, which is a chronological deep dive of Disney animated films powered by Disney+. This week they review the 2006 Pixar movie Cars. That is this week on The Castle Vault. And in the not too distant future, next Sunday AD, it's a brand new episode of Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast, where they interview Mike Nelson from Mystery Science Theater 3000 and Riff Tracks, and they discuss not only about his career, but riffing with Weird Al on the movie Jurassic Park. That is Dave and Ethan's 2000-inch Weird Al podcast. And finally, check out Sharks Pond, a South Park podcast where I watch, review, and discuss each and every South Park episode. This week, I review More Crap. No, that's the name of the episode. More Crap. I mean, I do review a lot of crap, but this week I'm reviewing More Crap. That's this week on Sharks Pond, a South Park podcast. All right. Next week on the show, going to review AEW Revolution, thoughts, ratings on the pay-per-view, and a bunch of wrestling news I'm sure will come up in between by the time you guys hear this to next week. And don't forget, 3 weeks, March 26th, special episode as we talk about the 20th anniversary of the official end of the Monday Night Wars. That's in 3 weeks on that wrestling show. Everybody have a good, safe weekend. Stay safe wherever you are, and come back next week for another episode of That Wrestling Show, the podcast where all pro wrestling matters. And as always, wrestle on.